Good afternoon. Welcome to the Senate Finance Committee. It is Wednesday, January 15th. We have a briefing today on the long-term solvency of the uninsured employers fund, result of the work group, and I'm going to ask that Mr. Michael Burns come to the table and I guess share your report. We have the report, but highlight for us the important things, Michael. Thank you. Understand you were lost for a minute.
Not for the first time, Madam Chair, as you know well. May I ask first, Madam Chair, the discussion with the staff was perhaps a half hour to do the briefing. What's your pleasure?
We'd like for you to stick to a half hour.
Can do.
And then,
all right. Yes,
thank you. If you can.
So.
Thank you.
All right. Fine. Well, let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, Senator, the new Vice Chair, welcome. Senator Kramer, nice to see you again. And let us begin, because I'm sure you have many things to do today. My name is Michael W. Burns. I am the director of the Maryland Uninsured Employers Fund. I want to first appreciate your time and your opportunity to speak today and discuss this matter with you. A couple of things I do also want to point out to you today. One, because of the way the work group process worked out, there is not a vote of the work group on specific recommendations. It was more of a discussion, and the UEF and the WCC met to discuss these matters, and we have some recommendations we agree with, some we don't with the WCC, but there was not a vote taken on these matters. So I want to emphasize that to you. There are two reports. I think the reports speak for themselves on why that happened. Water under the bridge to me. As to the other report, I've been through 5 legislative audits. We're in our 5th audit right now at the UEF. Your auditors are there doing their usual extremely thorough job, I must say. Very professional. And the competing report, to some extent, reads to me like a legislative audit. So I would suggest, I think the best policy would be, why don't you wait and see what your auditors say about the functioning of the Uninsured Employers Fund. I trust them, and I know you do. And I think since we're doing an audit with professional auditors, let us see if there are problems at the UEF that are reflected in the other report. And I think if there are, certainly you all, as the legislature, have an obligation to deal with that. And if not, it is up to you to decide what you wish to do with that. And enough said about that. So I've done bill hearings, I've done budget hearings, but I've never done a presentation. I thought the easiest way to do this was to track our report. So if you have the report available, please follow along with me, and I will go through it with you briefly, and then I will try to save time for questions. This work group was established as a result of the Joint Chairman's report, and on page 2 of my report, you can see it was to establish a work group to study report on changes to the UEF's funding structure, operations, other factors. In particular, the work group should consider options for increasing the UEF's revenues and recommend whether legislative changes were needed. I have tried, I think the word desperately is appropriate. I tried desperately during the process, and I really attempted in this report to do that. So hopefully that's what we will do. There are 2 reports. That's explained in the report. Let me explain first, because I think it's important, workers' compensation and our role, and it will take all of about 30 seconds. I will explain to you workers' compensation in one sentence. It's one of the oldest and most successful social programs in world history. Here's how it works. Employees give up their right to sue their employer in exchange for their employer having insurance to protect them if they're injured. Everything else flows from that. That's workers' compensation. What happens if the employer, for whatever reason, and believe me, I have heard every reason possible in 8 years. What happens if they don't have insurance? That's where we come in. We are a payer of last resort. I want to emphasize that to you. We are the payer of last resort, but we exist to protect injured workers when they are injured and there is no insurance protection for them. Now, on page 7, I told you we'd move along fast. In spite of what some people think, and I had some difficulty with members of the work group on this, again, the UEF is not an insurance company. It doesn't set premiums. We don't issue policies. We don't evaluate client risk. We don't have a contractual relationship with clients. We don't have premiums, don't raise premiums to cover losses or increase revenue. Employers who cooperate in workers' compensation cases in normal situations not only fail to cooperate with us, they often hide actively from us. That's what we deal with. We're entirely self-funded. We're statutorily created. We're independent. And we receive 85 to 90% of our funding from a 1% assessment on most permanency awards from the Workers' Compensation Commission, which can be 2% if the board determines the reserves of the fund are inadequate to meet anticipated losses. That has been in effect for at least 15 years because the money's been needed to keep the agency's funding to injured workers consistent. All right, please now move to pages 8 and 9. The first recommendation, the main recommendation I would make to you and the UEF would make to you is the following. During the past 2 fiscal years, the average funding from assessments received from the Workers' Compensation Commission is abnormally low. This is not, and it's nothing the Workers' Compensation Commission did. They haven't done anything wrong. It's just the way it works. They have been low, though, to the tune of $2.7 million. Now, that may not sound like a lot of money here, but to the UEF, that's a lot of revenue loss. Our fund correspondingly has been down in that period approximately $3 million. As I explained to the work group, as I will explain to you, as this document explains, the UEF has a funding problem, not an expenditure problem. What has happened is our revenue has gone from about 9 million, and that's a low estimate. It's really around 9.3, but I used 9 to be fair, I guess, to, in the last 2 fiscal years, 7.3 million and 8.4. We can't make that up. It's that simple. The one-in-one process, which was established by you all in 1983 as the funding mechanism, is no longer sufficient to fund the agency. It is that simple. I have come in the past and given that warning that the day would come when it would be a matter of necessity to consider alternatives, and the days come to consider alternatives. The governor's administration is supporting a Senate bill, Senate Bill 219, which the chair was kind enough to sponsor for the agency and the administration, that would raise the optional percentage from 1+1 to 1+2. This does not mean it's going to be a 3% assessment, all right? It is not a 3% assessment. And again, it is a 1+ if it is required by the board in order to ensure payments to injured workers. What I envision, and as long as I am there, and hopefully whoever succeeds me, whenever that may be, this is how they would handle it with your oversight, because I'm sure the legislature will be watching this, is what would happen immediately if this bill were passed? We would raise the assessment to 3% for a year or 2. See how much money comes in, see where we are, see what some of these other ideas generate for revenue. I believe, and I really do believe this, that after a year or 2, probably 2, the fund would be in a position to lower it again back to 2%. And I would hope with some of these other ideas that would be nurtured and take effect, in particular last year's bill to raise the penalty for failure to have insurance from $10,000 to $25,000, which unfortunately, according to the information from my staff, even though that bill was enacted by the legislature and took effect July 1st, we have received no cases from the Workers' Compensation Commission of $25,000 penalties. According to my staff, we received no penalties at all over $10,000. So hopefully that will change and that revenue will come in. The fiscal note on that I had developed assumed much more aggressive funding from that, and so that money's not available, but I would hope that would be available. Eventually, it would go to 2% and perhaps back down to 1. But what I envision is a much more active review every year of where we are. And I think now that the legislature is so deeply involved in what the UEF does finally after 8 years, you will all be looking over their shoulder and make sure that happens. So that is the top recommendation from this agency. It's a simple answer. It is an answer that will work. It will solve the problem. It will generate $3 to $4 million. I think that's depending on just how much the assessment process generates in the next year. It will enable the fund to pay workers. Also, one of the issues that's come up in audits is the fact that we have had vacancies, pins that haven't been filled for years. And the simple reason is because we don't have enough money to pay those people because the fund pays its employees, state employees out of the fund. It's not general funded. I'm paid by the Indigent Workers Fund, not state of Maryland, really. That's one of the recommendations of the work group to look at. I realize, having been in the House of Delegates, that this year, anybody coming here asking for money from the general fund may be on a fool's errand with you. But I would ask you to at least consider it as an option. It's about $1.5 to $2 million. It would have an impact. I don't think it's a long-term solution, but I think it would go some distance to relieving current pressure if you wish to take time to make other decisions. And just personally, I think state employees should be paid from the general fund. That's just my opinion, but obviously, since you have the votes, it's up to you to decide. The recommendations. Obviously, we've just talked about that. Let's go to page 10 or 12 for the recommendations. We have, I was really, and Senator Cramer, thank you. Senator Cramer, Senator Rosapep, Delegate Spiegel, and Delegate Harrison were invaluable, as I, having been a legislature, expected them to be. So I appreciate very much some of these ideas Senator Cramer expressed views on. He can say what he wants to you all after this is all taken care of, what he thinks. Yeah. And my experience in the House of Delegates was senators were never recalcitrant about expressing their opinions. So, and I also learned to keep my mouth shut and hope for the best. So I will do that with this too. Let's start with the first one, the assessment reallocation idea. Obviously, the SIF doesn't like that at all, subsequent injury fund. I can understand why. There are reasons why that was suggested. If you go to the subsequent injury fund website, you will see that by their own document as to their, I think it's Managing for Results that they actually post on there. Each of the last, I think, 8 fiscal years, their fund keeps going up. It keeps going up and up and up because there's a feeling amongst some of my board, in fact, I think all the board, that the SIF does not need 6.5% anymore, and the UEF does need 3%. The benefit to that would be it would hold harmless insurance companies if you did that. I know that Ed Dodd and the SIF is vehemently opposed. They presented evidence on that. Senator Cramer sat through it. It's up to you all. I decided officially we weren't going to take any position, even though the board does favor it. I thought it was best to do it that way. 2, having the staff paid out of the general fund. It'll save at least $1.5 million a year, and we are state employees, and the money really should be dedicated, as is the statute, to injured workers. But again, this year in particular, I can see how that may be a non-starter. A private collection agency. I've wanted to do this for years. I really have. This makes total sense. My concern has always been it requires an RFP process. Amongst my career items, I was a member of and the chairman of the State Board of Contract Appeals for 7 years. I understand contracting, and I understand procurement, and I feel like maybe it has to go through an RFP process. If it doesn't, we can move on that quickly. Then there's the issue of the Central Collections Unit. And I don't want to beat up on the CCU, so I'm not. All I'll say is they've had enormous difficulty collecting our debt. I don't know why. We've tried to work with them. I will simply tell you that we have $60 million at the CCU. They are the collection agency for the state, and they average about $5,000 a month. It's been unprofitable to send the debt there. I will also note to you that as your central collection unit, once they get the debt, they have jurisdiction over that debt. It's no longer agency debt to collect. So in the past, when I got to the UEF in 2016, we'd send the debt to the CCU and it was gone. We couldn't collect it anymore after 180 days. Working with my attorney generals, we did a memo of understanding in 2019 to change that. We have joint jurisdiction now, so they can collect, we can collect. And even though this issue came up, there's no need to go messing with our the CCU's jurisdiction. The more people we can get collecting, the more money we're going to collect. Number 5, this will tell you what the legislature envisioned for the UEF back in 1983. Section 91011 of Labor and Employment has this strange, weird provision, which is when the UEF assessment gets to $5 million, we are supposed to stop collecting the assessment. The fund gets to the $5 million, we stop until we get to $3 million. That makes no sense at all. I put a bill in 2019 or 2018 to have that repealed, and the legislature chose not to, but I probably didn't explain it well enough, then, to be honest with you. But it shows you that that back in 1983, your predecessors, thought that this agency would only need $3 to $5 million. Well, that's clearly, for 20 years, not been the case. So the assessment that was built into that, 1 + 1, to get you to $5 million, is no longer adequate. But you can see from historical views here that your predecessors thought, well, when they get to $5 million, they're not going to need any more money, which is clearly not the case. Now, there is a safety valve in 91007, which I've mentioned to you, which is this provision that if the board determines that the agency requires an additional 1% for purposes of funding the injured workers' payments, they can raise it to that. So clearly, it was understood that the fund might need more money back then and need a higher assessment. So we didn't put any legislation in because the administration frowned on a lot of different bills this year, and so we focused on 2 things. But in the future, if any of you wish to do that, or if it comes to you, I hope you will support it, because it makes no sense to be in the law, and it's just, when I was here, I used to put bills in to get rid of things that made no sense. That just doesn't make any sense. Let's go to the next one. Raising the optimal assessment percentage, we've talked about that. Number 8, redirect civil penalties currently paid in the general fund from workplace fraud to be paid to the UEF. This is Chair Quinn's idea. It is of the WCC. It's an intriguing idea. It's a great idea, and I've tried to delve into it. Senator Cramer may recall Delegate Spiegel, when this first came up, had his staff do a lot of research in it and provided documentation to the work group about it, which I went through. I was a little unclear because it's not in my bailiwick. I was a little unclear if the amounts were actually all workplace fraud amounts or other amounts or what. It's a very intriguing idea, but frankly, the agency doesn't know anything about it, and perhaps in the future, it would be something to consider. I imagine the Department of Labor would have something to say about it, though, and it probably wouldn't be favorable. But it's a long-term fix that might be an answer, frankly. So thanks, Chair Quinn, for that. Transfer an amount from the SIF to the UEF. The chairman of the board is strongly in favor of this. Again, it's our view that the SIF continues to not need a 6.5% assessment. Their fund keeps going up and up, and I have no idea how they'll ever spend that money, but they have a different view, understandably. Senator Kramer could tell you that. I put that in because that's something the chairman supports, and I work at the pleasure of our board, and you wanted options, so there's an option. Amended Section 9407 to require, rather than permit the UAF to initiate civil actions to reduce judgments and all penalties to judgments. That's a great idea, but it's time consuming, and the issue with it is, in every case, do you want to do that? I mean, we get a lot of cases where actually employers will cooperate with us, and if we did that, we'd have to sue them. And one of the things about suing employers, the ones who aren't doing it deliberately, I was going to say crooks, but that's probably not appropriate. But the ones who kind of made a mistake or something, and if they can, they're working with us, they're really sometimes in real trouble because they've made this mistake. All right? And I will say this to you because I say it to the staff all the time. We're not in the business of putting people out of business. That's not what we want to do. So we do a lot of payment plans. We do a lot of payment. I will tell, I refer to it, the bazaar is always open with me. I've got payment plans that go 40 years, okay? Because some money is better than no money. And a payment every month is better than somebody going bankrupt and you get nothing. So, if you push people with this and they get a lawsuit and they have to hire a lawyer, it may push them out of paying to just declare bankruptcy because under federal bankruptcy laws, our debts are dischargeable in bankruptcy. So I'm always working to make sure people don't do that because they always have the option, and a lot of the more marginal employers we deal with will declare bankruptcy, get out of the debt, form a new company with a different name, and off they go again. And that's just the way it works. And that's federal, so there's nothing we can do about that. Now, the last item is a suggestion that the UEF bring in-house its claims operation. Now, I have, this is number 11. This goes on for 6 pages for me. And it is as detailed as I can make it about why that is a bad choice. I could be more blunt about it, but I would describe it as a bad choice. I can tell you 2 things, and I really wish that I was under oath, because I would swear and affirm under the penalties of perjury the following. 1, the single best thing we have done in 8 years to get the UEF functioning correctly is hire a professional TPA. No doubt about it in my mind whatsoever. It was a godsend to us. It impacts positively everything else we do. Many counties in Maryland hire professional TPAs to do their workers' compensation, and their workers' compensation is a heck of a lot simpler than ours because they do real workers' comp. Why do you think counties do that? To waste money? To get bad service? They do it because it's economical and they get great service. And would you like to know who most of those counties hire? They hire the TPA we have had since an emergency procurement, a procurement in 2019, and the most recent procurement. They hire the Corvell Corporation because it's the gold standard nationally, okay? And that's why we do it. You bring it in-house, and this is the second thing I will tell you, and again, I wish I were under oath. If you do away with a professional TPA and bring it in-house, this legislature will eventually cause the destruction of the UEF again, and you will have to fix it. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And I've been director for 8 years. I have something of a career behind that, and I'm telling you, it is, and I understand the arguments against it, and I understand the goodwill of some of the people involved in that, but it is a horrifically bad idea. Do not do it. If you read through this and cannot see why I say that, well, you're the legislature and you all get to decide. So, but please, I mean, why do counties do it? Why would counties do it? if it cost them money and it was a bad idea. It's just, most states use them. It's just the way to do it, all right? We recommend that you do not go down that route. Now, one last thing that I don't want to bring up, but I have to, for any number of reasons, is the discussion into this TPA took an odd turn in the work group. As I told you, we were authorized to do a study for you all. Members of the work group decided instead we were going to begin a process to transition away from the TPA into an in-house TPA. We were in the midst of a procurement at that time, and near the end of it. And so that created conflicts and rendered us unable to provide information to the work group because it was illegal to do so, because there was a procurement underway for which I was criticized both publicly and privately by individuals on the work group for doing that. But it's against law, so I didn't do it. This work group started a project to actually transition out of the TPA without the approval or the participation of the agency. Again, I imagine Senator Kramer remembers this. I spoke up about that, and I tried very much to explain that that was improper and should not go forward. Eventually, it got to the point where the procurement office of the state of Maryland found out about this. And the day that they really found out what was going on was the same day we had one of our meetings, the October meeting. And on that, and it was a Zoom call, on that call, Yasmin Mohammed, who was the director of the Maryland State Procurement Operations Bureau, got on the call. And Mr. Mohammed said to the work group, "This is improper. It's got to stop now." And it stopped. However, I've been criticized repeatedly for, and maybe, did I get defensive about it? I imagine I did. Did it come unexpectedly to me at the meeting in September? Absolutely. I had no idea any of this was going to happen. Was I caught flat-footed? I imagine to some extent I was. So if I said anything to irritate anybody or hurt anybody's feelings, I'm sure sorry. But it is my job and the job of state employees and the job of the legislature and the job of the governor and the job of everybody to ensure the law is followed and obeyed. That's what we do. I am also an officer of the court of the state of Maryland. I have an obligation as an attorney when I see illegal activity to speak up and to try to stop it. And I did. And I would do it again. Now, I'm sure that the people involved didn't think it was that way. They may still not think it was improper. They may say, and they said that we've stonewalled, we wouldn't provide information. There's a lot of information you can't provide when a procurement's in process. You're just not allowed to, and for any number of reasons. And some of it's commercial protected information that can't be disclosed. In addition, we were criticized for not providing information to the work group about injured clients and their files. But we can't do that for the most part either. I mean, there's information we can give out, but these are people with medical injuries, and we can't just give out that information to other people. I will also tell you that the decisions I made and the actions we took were in absolute consultation with the Office of the Attorney General staff at our agency, and I followed their advice. So I'm sorry some people think that they were stonewalled and we went out of our way not to give them information, but the actual truth is, because I participated in it, the actual truth is we spent days and days and days trying to get information to the work group that was permissible to do. And we had private meetings with members of the work group to try to explain this and to explain to them why some of the things they were saying were incorrect. Success was limited, but we did attempt it. So I owe a real debt to the Office of the Attorney General for their guidance and their help with that. And I'm sorry I've had to bring that up. I wish I didn't have to, but I have an obligation. And when you're, one of the things I've discovered in 66 years of being a grown-up is sometimes you have to act like it. and I just had to. And I am sorry to have to do that. I really am. In conclusion, this is a small agency, okay? I mean, you guys have so much to do. I get it. I was here. And it's like you're having this briefing about this little agency with this dispute. But I will tell you, to most Marylanders, it doesn't matter. But to a couple of thousand people, it's life and death. You've got to have the money to pay injured workers and their families. It's been 42 years since the assessment was changed. The time's come to change it. The time has come. The insurance industry will complain, and I get it, I know. But they've been paying less for the last 2 years as it is, so it's not going to be a $3 million hit. It's going to be less than that. But is it going to be a hit? Yes, unless you reallocate, and that's your call. But you all made a decision in 1983, this is how it was going to be funded. This is the mechanism. If you can come up with a better way, I just, I'll take any money you want to give me. But I'm telling you, the answer now is to raise that assessment. And I think there was a number of people in the work group would agree with me. And that is our report. And Madam Chair, thank you for your time. And if anybody's got any questions, I will desperately attempt to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. We do have a question from Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to you, Director Burns.
Hello, sir.
I will say that several of the meetings we had were certainly colorful, and I appreciate your passion for your position. And I think that what we saw were different state agencies defending their turf. And like I said, I appreciate your advocacy for the UEF. I don't think I will take issue with you, at least at this point, with regard to your assertion that the third-party administrator is very important to the success of the fund at the moment. I think there was discussion that long-term, there might be, it might be a worthwhile endeavor to start looking at the possibility of bringing some of those positions in-house, but I don't disagree with you. That's something we would want to just do cold. We would have to have a very thorough understanding of what the implications are and how well the agency might be able to handle that work. So I don't disagree with your assertions at the moment about it's important to keep the third-party administrator. And it appears as though that contract came in priced better than it had previously, which I think has helped at least give the impression that the agency is a little more stable at the moment. But we do need to look forward long term. I do note that the chair of the commission has suggested that perhaps in lieu of a 1% increase in the assessment on awards, that perhaps there might be a 0.5% increase. And I think that that might be a prudent suggestion. And then we have the opportunity to see how the balance is reflected. The concern that I have in increasing that assessment is that that assessment is on our businesses that are in fact doing the right thing and paying for their insurance. And this is a tax that they pay on top of that. So I am just cautious about what we are doing to our business community. But I also respect the fact that you see the need to increase the fund. So I'm just making note of, and I'm sure we will hear the chair opine on that and to the logic. One of the other things, and I don't know what the numbers look like. I know our friends at the Subsequent Injury Fund very much objected to the prospect of any transfer of additional share of the fund. But I think there was some valid point that you had made to the idea that maybe, there could be some adjustment or shift in those percentages. And I guess my question would be, in lieu of 1% assessment, if it were a 0.5% and then perhaps a half came out of the SIF, would you have a calculation as to what that would look like?
Sure.
If that were to happen? So instead of, I believe, is it 6.5?
Yes, sir.
So if that went to 6 and you all benefited from that half, do we know what that might look like? And I'm guessing I'll have some visits from people from the SIF probably in the very near future hearing my comments, but I'm just wondering if that might also be a reasonable and responsible option to look at.
Senator, when I was here as in the minority party, and to get anything done, I learned to say yes, take yes for an answer. That's a marvelous idea. Unfortunately, I happen to know off the top of my head several of the numbers you're looking for. In the new contract, it's been reduced to $1.68 million for administrative costs a year. And one of the figures you have to bear in mind with that's mostly salaries, but that's salaries and benefits paid by a contractor, not by the state. Based on information that was given to the work group by the representative of Chesapeake Insurance, they estimate it would cost $125,000 a piece to hire people to come in and do what Corvell does now. The staffing, I think, is 8 persons and 8 what? And yourself? Yeah, Mr. Schaefer confirms that. So it's 9. A number of functions are taken care of by the National Corvell organization, not the staff on site. So to duplicate their work, I estimate it would take 12 people. We, something else.
You're discussing if it were to be pulled in-house?
Yes, yes.
All right. Let's say we're putting that on the table for the time being, pushing that out, maybe looking forward into the future, maybe studying that. But for this legislative session, if we were just to move forward with the Corvell contract and that, my question is, do you think if we were to shift that 0.5% from SIF, from 6.5 to 6, and they do have a large balance, and I know, again, I'm going to get some feedback from them.
Yes.
Do you think that would be advantageous and help stabilize?
Absolutely.
Okay.
2.5 and a half equals 3. Absolutely it would. And if you run the numbers on the SAF, I think the key number for that is in fiscal 21, when we did, and Senator Klausmeier is the one who arranged that for us. We had a big meeting, and we made the UEF 3 and the SAF 5.5. At 5.5%, their fund balance still increased during that year. So can they take a 0.5% hit? I think the numbers bear that out. Yes, absolutely. If they're averaging 3.5 to 5 million a year, and you take $1 million out of that, they'll average 2.5 to 4 million a year. Senator, I would support that any way you need me to support it, and this agency would too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Do I have any other questions for Director Burns? Seeing no questions, thank you for your briefing.
It's always a pleasure to come home. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that, there we go. I couldn't see you, Chair Quinn, you were behind the podium. So this is Chair Maureen Quinn from the Workman's Comp Commission, and she's going to present the Workman's Comp Commission's report on the solvency of UEF. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Beidle, and our condolences to you and Vice Chair Hayes. Congratulations on your new position. Please know the workers' comp community is highly engaged, so please expect to hear from all stakeholders frequently throughout the session. And greetings, members of the committee, and especially thank you, Senator Kramer, for your efforts during our meetings of the Legislative Work Group. So, I'm Maureen Quinn. I'm the chair of the Workers' Comp Commission, and I'm here with our Assistant Attorney General, Scott Curtis. And so, Director Burns and I obviously have widely varying views of the Legislative Work Group's mission and with respect to what we respectively think of as the next steps. And I'll begin by saying that there was really trouble right out of the gate because the work group thought we had 5 years to work on this insolvency issue because the actuary had said they'll be insolvent in FY 2030. So all that changed at the very first meeting when the UEF divulged that the fund balance was only $5.3 million. That's all the money they had left to pay salaries and medical bills and injured workers' benefits. So there was clearly a short-term crisis that had to be dealt with. So we have offered this body some short-term solutions. Whether they are politically viable, we will have to wait and see. But to go to Senator Kramer's point about the 0.5% versus 1% increase, a 0.5% increase is a 25% increase in taxes on law-abiding businesses. And obviously 1% is a 50% increase in taxes. So I'll come back to that solution in just a minute. But my urgent request to this committee is to appoint a monitor for the next year who can uncover what I think we should have learned through this work group. The UEF is an agency that is in both short-term and long-term crisis, and we cannot take our eyes off of it because it cannot fail. And I think waiting until the audit comes back much, much later this year it is not a viable option given the deterioration in the bank balance that we have seen over the course of our deliberations. My sense is that this is an agency that's hollowed out. And if the answer to that is yes, then it really needs comprehensive reform. The agency, to me, seems to lack the people to enforce its mandate. I don't think a single business license has ever been suspended for failure to have insurance. I don't think a single penalty has ever been reduced to judgment so that assets could be seized to collect penalties. I have heard from the UEF for numerous years that private collections was a great idea. None of this has happened. And I don't think it's because they don't believe in it or have the will to do it. I just think they lack the human resources to do it. So I think you are owed an explanation of why the Legislative Work Group couldn't complete its work. Several members of the committee felt that we really couldn't justify raising the assessment on law-abiding businesses unless we had assurances that the UEF was going to bring this TPA expense under control. The TPA expense is, in my view, the single largest cause of the UEF's financial predicament, and the legislative budget analysts have made their discontent clear over the last 3 to 5 years. That particular TPA contract had expired just as we were about to deliberate. And the new contract was pending before the Board of Public Works. And because it was pending before the Board of Public Works, we were barred from receiving any particular details about it. Second, no data of any kind was ever offered by the UEF during the pendency of the work group, despite my request for it. Now, I was given the data, but with the caveat that I couldn't share it with anyone. So without getting into the weeds of whether any of that was justified, I'll simply tell you I thoroughly reviewed all of the data. I, by and large, understand it. I understand the ramifications of it. But I will say there were sufficient errors in it that highlight the need for monitoring. Just as one example, I was given loss run reports. These are critical documents in the insurance industry, which detail, among other things, how many claims are being managed. The first report I was given said they have 350 claims. I was told that was wrong. They would get me another one. They sent me a second loss run report that had 628 claims. I sat down, I compared it to the first report. I can tell you it's wrong. Now, I could have gone back and I could have said, this is wrong too, give me another one. But at some point, I have my own agency to run that's not perfect and that requires my attention. And so I need the legislature to see what I'm seeing. And I am seeing some sloppy TPA work. Now, I do want to compliment the TPA because even over the past 5 years, I will say I've done my own research with attorneys, and they tell me that injured workers are getting their checks on time and that their medical bills are being paid promptly. But some of the aspects of management are just not being handled well, and there's not good oversight, and this is not coming from me. This is coming from the legislative budget analysts. And third, I think we couldn't complete our work because, as I mentioned in my report, the UEF made members very uncomfortable, and it stymied our discussion of reforms and solutions. The director has complained about our discussion of transition to in-house adjusting. The MIA was a member of our work group. The MIA said, you know what, we have someone on our IT staff that knows a lot about how to use the state's master software system to do in-house adjusting. She set up a meeting, asked for a schedule. The UEF didn't even respond to her email. I finally said, well, I think we should meet with them anyway. We all have a responsibility to do a report to the legislature. So we attended the meeting and got the information, but the UEF didn't attend, didn't offer any reason for not attending. And just another example of how things could have gone. Just the other day, Mr. Curtis and I were discussing this unit that we use to pursue uninsured businesses and bring them into court and penalize them. And he said to me, maybe that entire function should be done by the UEF. And they could have a commissioner there, and they could bring people in all day long and have hearings about whether or not they should have insurance, and then they could enforce their own orders. And I said, this is exactly the kind of thing we could have talked about if the atmosphere within the work group was better and more open and more receptive to people's ideas. So I've asked for a monitor, and the question is who? Who would undertake such a function? We have a number of recently retired, highly qualified insurance professionals and defense attorneys who would understand Corvell data and the UEF structure and mission, and I think we could find one of them who would work for a modest fee as a service to the workers' compensation community. I think the UEF should have to pay this monitor, and the monitor should be empowered to go on site, receive data, meet with employees and contractors. The monitor then needs to submit monthly findings to either a member of this committee, a member of the budget committee, or the oversight committee if it should be revived, or some combination of the three. And my report fully documents the duties that I envision a monitor performing, so I won't repeat those here. I'll just close by saying that with respect to the solution, if we increase that assessment by 0.5%, that will produce an additional $2 million in revenue annually, which makes up for the decrease in assessments from our agency awards, and gives it another $1.25 million in an overage to build up its bank account. Meanwhile, their administrative TPA expenses should be declining, and if that happens, the bank balance will continue to improve. But again, all of that, I think, requires extensive monthly monitoring. So thank you, and I await your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do I have any questions at all for Ms. Quinn? Anything? No questions? Thank you, Senator Motz. No?
Hey, Madam Chair, just quickly, we're referencing the collections, the lack of no collections for businesses that don't have insurance or are supposed to be fined for assets seized, whatever. It was my understanding that in order to get a business license, you have to show proof of having workers' comp insurance. So where do those businesses, are they, this is work situations where there is an official contract, it's sort of side work where people are operating a business.
Right.
And so they just sort of fall through the cracks.
Yeah. I think there's two ways to look at this. One is if you think about the construction industry and how we have undocumented workers who have all been turned into independent contractors because they can't be hired as W-2 employees. And so you have this huge population of workers who are just uninsured. But the subcontractors who are hiring them, they're not admitting to anyone that they have undocumented workers that are on usually a cash payroll.
And who would investigate and prosecute something like that?
Well, I am on the governor's task force against workplace fraud and misclassification. And, you know, I'll tell you that what I concluded from my work on that task force all year is that nothing can get built in this country with documented workers. There just aren't enough of them. And so we are all just sort of stuck, you know, until the federal government really resolves this immigration issue. So just one piece of this is, you know, these are very dangerous jobs in construction, and we've siphoned them off, and we've turned so many of them into independent contractors. So nobody's looking. The other thing is, if you think about your county courthouses where, you know, a plumber might go in the morning to go pull a permit to, you know, do a job. There's no clerk at the county who's saying, "Where's your workers' comp insurance?" Because even if they were to ask that, they're going to say, "Oh, I don't have any employees."
Right. Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I can add?
Yes.
You know, you might have the insurance at the time that you get your license, but it doesn't mean that you pay the next month premium.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so policies cancel, and there's no notification process like it is for your car insurance. So that's another issue that maybe could be
That's a
resolved.
good point. And we see businesses that play that game. We go after them, they buy the insurance, they cancel it 2 months later, and they're back before us.
Sounds like Maryland Auto Insurance Fund. Senator Ellis, are you next? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a question. What's the ideal balance in the fund? You mentioned that $5 million is not good.
I can't answer that because I don't know how many claims they're managing, and they say they set reserves, but then they say we refuse to set reserves because we're not an insurance company, but they're exactly like an insurance company once you get to the point where we've found them responsible and they're managing the claim. They do have more upfront work investigating who might be a potential liable employer, but after we make a decision that they're responsible, it's like any other insurance claim.
So who would be
I would
able
like
to-
to know how many claims they are actually managing.
Yeah. So who would be able to answer that question as far
I will
as-
say that, I'll say this, 5 million is woefully inadequate.
Okay. Because you started saying that, but they say you don't know what's
I mean,
adequate. I mean, I'm just kind
It
of.
could be
at a loss.
50 million.
Could be.
It could be. But it's definitely a lot more than 5.
Could be a lot more about. So who can we go to get an answer, definitive answer? What-
This is why I think we need a monitor, because we need somebody to come back and tell you how many claims are they managing and what are the reserves? Because if they say, well, the reserves for these 600, 700, 800 claims that we have is, you know, $80 million, then, you know, there's an insurance formula that will tell you, well, how much do you have to have on your books today if your ultimate liabilities are 80 million?
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Reedy?
I had one other question, but I'm curious, why can't, maybe I've been listening here, but why can't we know how many claims there are right now?
Because the loss run reports I've been given aren't accurate.
Okay. Well, how can we get accurate loss run reports?
Well, I think if, I will sit down with the UEF and I'll show them why their reports are inaccurate, and then
They have
they
some
can redo them
disagreement?
and submit them to you.
Okay, okay. The reason I wanted to ask the question was something a little different, but that's certainly interesting. You mentioned undocumented workers in the construction field, and of course you're right. There's a lot of that. I guess we don't have the data to say this, but how many of these businesses that are scofflaws on this? How many of them is it because of that issue? You're probably going to tell me you don't have the data on that. But is that a large percentage of the people, of the businesses that are doing this, or?
In the construction industry?
Well, yeah, I mean, is that the reason we have a
I think the answer
deficit?
to that is yes, because what has happened at the federal level is that enforcement preventing the W-2 employment of workers has forced a lot of businesses to say, well, I can't hire the workforce I need, so I'm going to hire a subcontractor who's going to hire another subcontractor who's a Latino broker who knows how to find guys to bring to the job site.
But,
And so
okay,
you're many layers deep.
understood. So when a worker comes to you that's not here legally,
Right. Yeah.
what happens to that business? So the business is not paying,
Right.
why
The
why
business
isn't there an enforcement mechanism at that point?
Well, we do. We penalize the business.
Okay.
When the injured worker comes before us, and that's a separate fine from the fine structure when we bring the business before us under another provision where where we can impose up to a $25,000 fine.
Can you then,
Yeah, yes, let me have our assistant AG
I can
comment.
explain the sort of the legislative framework for this.
Sure.
So most of what we're talking about with these $25,000 fines are for the Workers' Compensation Commission finding out that somebody does not have insurance without there being an injured worker. It's just the
Okay.
paperwork finding out. That's the maximum fine is $25,000. For an injured worker who comes before the commission and then the commission finds that their employer is uninsured, that's a different provision. That's under 9-1005. And the other provision, the 25,000 maximum fine, is 9-407.
does the money that when you get the 20, so and I get that, the 25K, does that go to the uninsured?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying.
In theory.
All right. And then is there a mechanism for you if this circumstance where a business is employing people illegally, can you then refer them to the federal authorities, or is that not something you're allowed to do, something you do?
It's not in our statute as a mechanism, but it's not to say we couldn't. But what we're finding is mostly focusing on the employer, as
Right.
whether they have
That's your
insurance
job.
or not.
Right. That's your job.
Right, not
Gotcha.
the status necessarily of the worker.
Okay.
And
That may come out of the hearing, but it's not the focus of the hearing.
And the important power that we have beyond just money is we order them to go by a workers' compensation
Right.
policy.
Sure. They have to. Or what happens? They lose their license, correct? They lose their ability to do business?
Well, they get fined, I mean.
They
the
continue to get fined?
mechanism Is to be brought back to the commission and
And
refined.
fined again?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's
But
interesting.
of course, the UEF has the licensure power
Yeah.
or revocation power.
Yeah. It's interesting in the construction industry, it's probably, we ought to really be looking at what we're requiring that makes it so expensive to do construction to where we can't, where there's so much reliance on people who are here illegally for labor. But that's definitely not your purview, and it's not the point of this hearing. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do I have any other questions for? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you for the
Madam Chair, nice
invitation.
to see you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And that ends the briefing for today. So gee, enjoy the afternoon. It's one of the few days we're going to finish early. Thank you all.